Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you. I want to begin by saying thank you to Director Stevenson and Tiffany. The effort that went into pulling this meeting together was really energetic and I think effective. I also want to introduce myself a little bit. I'm the mayor of the city of Lima and have been since December 5th, 1989, which is before some of you were born. As a result of being in office that long, I've had the opportunity to live through the saga of the city's long-term control plan and consent decree. And so I want to share a little bit about that. I also want to indicate that a part of my role is also defined by the fact that I've been an active member of the U.S. Conference of Mayors and now serve as the co-chair of what's called the Mayor's Water Council, which has been a leading advocate for engagement with U.S. EPA, U.S. DOJ, and ultimately with the process of amending the Clean Water Act over the last several years, with the really the punctuation point being in January that the law was changed. And that became an opportunity for not just changing the law, but for changing the culture, changing the relationship between us at the local level, the state, and the federal government and its agencies. And that's what today is about. It's about the process of starting to change the culture of how we co-manage our environment. A little bit of history, but I think it's pertinent because we're here in Columbus. Columbus once had a mayor by the name of Greg Lashutka. Greg was also very active in the Conference of Mayors. Another active person and leader was former mayor of Cleveland, George Voinovich, eventually the governor of Ohio. Both Governor Voinovich and Greg Lashutka had active roles in talking about the burdens of unfunded federal mandates. And as a result of that, over the last 20 years, the Conference of Mayors has been engaged on behalf of our cities all across the country to talk about what has been happening in our communities as a result of a top-down relationship that began to simply load up requirements on us at a local level without providing us with resources to deal with those burdens and responsibilities. So, with that as background, I want to share with you a little bit about Lima's experience, and then I'm going to hand it over to Judy Sheehan from the Conference of Mayors to talk to you about the changes in the Clean Water Act that have set up this opportunity for today's conversation. Lima filed its long-term control plan in 1998, and within the year, Ohio EPA approved that plan. It was a $60 million long-term control plan, and we began to actively engage on the objectives of that and began to spend money. And 6 years later, found ourselves confronted with a preemption by U.S. EPA, which canceled that long-term control plan, but it resulted in something else. It changed the relationship. The relationship for us was no longer us with Ohio EPA. In fact, U.S. EPA told Ohio EPA, go sit in the corner. And for 10 years then, we found ourselves in a circumstance where we were in a pretty hostile relationship with U.S. EPA. I can honestly say that if it was not for the creation of the integrated planning policy by headquarters, we never would have gotten to an agreement on a consent decree. But with that plan, with that policy, and frankly with the active engagement of headquarters, who at multiple points in our negotiation around the consent decree and its provisions intervened with Chicago in order for us to be able to solve issues, to get to a point where the points of disagreement could in fact be resolved in ways that demonstrated a flexibility that simply wasn't there based upon the personalities and the interpretations coming out of Chicago. Ultimately, the City of Lima ended up in 2014 with a consent decree that we believe has still some very innovative components that others ought to know about. We ended up with a consent decree that's 27 years in length. We ended up with a consent decree that allowed us to prioritize our obligations, meaning that we did not have to do everything at once. We could define what were important issues and also what were not important issues. And ultimately, based upon those priorities, we were in fact able to stage the investments that the city was making with early action activities and also with postponing issues that truly didn't have to be dealt with immediately. And as a result of that, we were able to afford, at the end of the day, the kinds of improvements that we were making. So, by virtue of the integrated plan, we've taken on those obligations. What was a $60 million set of objectives is $150 million under the consent decree, and it's something that we're actively engaged in and doing it in a way that is more affordable for our citizens and companies than it would have otherwise been. So, Director Stevenson mentioned the objective from her perspective of opening the dialogue. I want to tell you that I like to establish some metrics. And for me, success, what would success look like for me today? Success is, first of all, your attendance. But secondly, after today, it is my hope, when we look back, that we end up with at least 10 Ohio communities that ultimately engage in a significant way to adopt an integrated plan. Ohio needs to be the place that makes integrated planning live as a real opportunity for our communities. Ohio needs to be the place that in fact demonstrates that integrated planning reestablishes a balance of regulatory authority and those relationships in a way that is not just a top-down circumstance, but involves communities at the local level making real decisions about what they can attack, what they can afford, and what they can do in partnership with the other regulatory authorities at the state and the federal levels. So, again, I want to thank Director Stevenson, all your colleagues, the folks from the communities that are here to talk about their stories, the issues they're confronting, and the need they have for real partnerships with the state as we deal with the issues that are on the table in front of us in our relationships with the federal agencies. So thank you, and it's now my privilege to introduce Judy Sheehan from the U.S. Conference of Mayors.
First of all, my name is Judy Sheehan. I'm the Assistant Executive Director at the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the Conference of Mayors, we're an organization based in Washington, D.C. We've been around since 1932. We represent the mayors of the largest cities in the United States, any city over 30,000 in population. There's about 1,400 cities in the United States. If you're a smaller city, you can still join us. You just can't vote, that's all. So our main, I have no presentations. Oh, I push the button? There, that's me. And my name's spelled right, which is amazing. So, and the Conference of Mayors prides itself on two things. One, we're, for lack of a better word, an advocacy organization where we represent the views of mayors to both Congress and the administration, but we also pride ourselves, like Mayor Berger talked about, a Mayor's Water Council. We bring mayors together in order to share best practices and cost-saving solutions and other innovative ideas that make a mayor run their city better. That's our goal, that's our job, and that's what makes us feel great. First of all, I do want to thank Tiffany, you are right. I believe Ohio EPA is the first organization to do outreach like this, and it's actually in the law. So thank you very much, and thank you for the leadership. And I also want to thank EPA headquarters for being here and engaging like this. I want to just Mayor Berger gave a brief history from the Lima perspective. I want to let you know how we got to this point. Back in the early 2000s, during the Mayor's Water Council meetings, individual mayors would come to us, and don't take offense, EPA, but complaining about EPA. Basically, they were complaining that they were being faced with huge unfunded mandates and that they were being treated like like they were being prosecuted and not working as partners. We ended up having a meeting in December of 2009 that we lovingly and jokingly refer to as a 12 Angry Mayors meeting. And yes, Mayor Berger was there. And at that meeting, it was Headquarters EPA, Office of Enforcement, Cynthia Giles, and Department of Justice, John Cruden, who did a very excellent job of listening to these mayors talk about this situation. They talked about the fact that it felt like, once again, they were being prosecuted and they were being treated almost like they were head of a chemical company purposely dumping chemicals into a river, as opposed to just being mayors of cities that were built with the best available technology at that time, and that they were being punished for huge rain events that were causing sewer overflows was the biggest thing that they kept on talking about. And the fact that when EPA came in, they seemed to pride themselves on, yes, they had 2% median household income as a target for what could be affordable, but it seemed like it was not a ceiling, but it was a floor. And so at that time, back in the 2000s, there was big headlines about, Akron, Ohio has to spend $1 billion. It was Indianapolis was $3.7 billion. Atlanta, $4.1 billion. Now, put in perspective, the biggest program that local governments get from the federal government is CDBG, and that's at around 3.4, or at the time maybe $4.1 billion. So Atlanta's one consent decree was equaling the entire support network for the entire nation. That got my boss's attention, and he's like, you go forth and work on this issue as hard as you can. And at that meeting with headquarters, EPA and Department of Justice, they agreed to work with us and decided to have a series of meetings, and I'll go into that in a little bit. But we were tasked by the mayors at that time to do a two-pronged system, work with the administration and ask them to give us as much flexibility that was in the Clean Water Act as possible, and also work with Congress to codify what EPA was doing. And so that's what we were doing as a dual track, and we couldn't have done it without a lot of partners and without our mayors advocating for it in the DC level. So our vision for integrated planning and for actually the entire is to create more tools that would be of assistance to cities. The idea of integrated planning was the idea that instead of doing everything in a silo where you would have to do a combined sewer overflow consent decree and a sanitary sewer overflow consent decree and stormwater, and then each one of them had like a 15-year or 20-year issue or a time frame, and they also were extremely expensive, and they also all were at that 2% level. We were finding ourselves, just perspective, local governments spent $123.6 billion, is that correct, or roughly, Rich? $123.6 billion in 2016, while at the same time the federal government gave about $2 billion in grants to states who gave them to loans to local governments. $123.6 billion, $2 billion in loans. We could not keep on affording doing what we were doing. we were hearing stories like for Baltimore, they were raising rates by 9% every year. Chicopee, Massachusetts, 132%. And we were finding that there were pockets of people that were spending 10, 12% of their income on their water and wastewater bill, and that did not seem correct. So the idea was for integrated planning was, can a city or a community work with their state or the headquarters to come up with a comprehensive or holistic plan where they would put all their unfunded mandates together, figure out which one had the biggest public health and environmental impacts, figure out what capital improvements had to be made, and work together in order to come up with this master plan where you sequence the biggest public health and environmental impacts first, and as Mayor Berger said, the things that maybe had less impact to maybe stretch that out a little bit longer and do them more at the end. So, and also remember at that time, green infrastructure wasn't allowed. I mean, it was sort of allowed, but it was more like the icing on the cake and not actually part of the solution because there was not enough modelings. So as a result of those many, many meetings, and I just want to thank Mayor Berger for his leadership this entire time. He is actually the only mayor that's still surviving out of that 12 Angry Mayors meeting. But as a result, though, EPA listened to us, they worked with us, and as a result, in April of 2011, we got the Green Infrastructure Memo. In June 5th of 2012, we got the Integrated Planning Framework Memo. And as of November 24th, 2014, we got a Financial Capability Memo. And then it only took 9 years, but we were able to get Congress in December to pass, and the President to sign in January, H.R. 7279, the Water Infrastructure Flexibility Act. I want to thank actually Ohio Congressmen, Mr. Gibbs, Mr. Latta, Mr. Shabbat, were all instrumental in constantly putting pressure and passing this legislation. So if they're your congressmen, please thank them for us. And so I just wanted to briefly go over what the law says. It's really quick, actually, it's only 6 pages. First of all, they reference back our June 5th, 2012 Integrated Planning Memo that the EPA headquarters went out and published. The permit, it basically states that a community can have a permit that incorporates an integrated plan, can include requirements for combined sewer overflow, sanitary sewer overflow, municipal stormwater discharge, municipal wastewater discharge, and TMDL. So CSO, SSO, stormwater, wastewater, TMDL, and it can also include in the permit projects, including innovative projects, to reclaim, recycle, or reuse water, as well as green infrastructure. It also addresses compliance issues. I'm going to read it. I'm not a lawyer. I play one on TV, but the law actually says a permit issued that incorporates an integrated plan may include a schedule of compliance under which actions taken to meet any applicable water quality-based effluent limitations may be implemented over more than one permit term if the schedule of compliance is authorized by state water quality standards and meets the requirements of the EPA regulation concerning compliance schedules. That's key. You can come up with a plan that is going to be more than one permit term, which I think can potentially be a game changer. Other parts of the bill, they codify the Green Infrastructure Memo. They are asking EPA to actually say EPA must promote the use of green infrastructure and coordinate the integration of green infrastructure into permitting, enforcement, planning efforts, research, technical assistance, and EPA funding guidance. They also, excuse me one moment. You get dry mouth when you get up here. And I don't like bottled water, but that's okay. It also says EPA must direct each regional office as appropriate based on local factors and consistent with the requirements of the Clean Water Act to promote and integrate the use of green infrastructure with the same thing. Other pieces, interesting pieces of the legislation is that EPA, or the state who has delegated authority, must inform communities of the opportunity to develop an integrated plan that may be incorporated into the municipality's permit. Well, I think congratulations, you are doing outreach, Tiffany, in order to educate people that they can do an integrated plan. So check that one off the box. So, the other thing that's really cool about the bill is that it creates a municipal ombudsman. It was kind of funny. Saying the word municipal ombudsman enough times and you'll you'll need more water. But what the municipal ombudsman is actually going to be placed in the administrator's office, or at least that's what the law says. And that person's job is to do technical assistance to municipalities seeking help to comply with the Clean Water Act, and help the administrator ensure that the agency's policies are implemented by all the offices of the EPA and its regional offices. And the ombudsman is supposed to ensure that every municipality seeking assistance is provided information regarding federal financial assistance, identify flexibility under the Clean Water Act, and about the opportunity to develop an integrated plan. And they're also responsible for information sharing. They are supposed to create, and it looks like they started, a web-based approach where they include information about all the things I just mentioned: federal financial assistance, flexibility, integrated planning, and also include, which we just saw, each permit, order, or judicial consent that implements or incorporates integrated planning. That was another thing that the mayors talked about, is that one region would approve of someone's maybe integrated plan or flexibility, but 2 regions over, they didn't even hear of this. So the idea would be that you could look at Lima's, for example, integrated planning, and see what they included in their plan. And no offense to lawyers and consultants, but maybe make them not as rich, because you could look at something that had been approved and share that best practice and maybe use that as a starting off point for your own community. Congress they're supposed to do a report to Congress within 2 years of passing of the bill. That includes a description of what they've been doing for the last 2 years. So we're about 8 or 9 months in. Everyone's talking about the goals for this meeting. This is phenomenal, having this many people. Personally, I mean, we've been working on this issue for 9 or 10 years. We see this as, once again, as Mayor Berger talked about, coming back with that partnership, the idea of the communities working with the state and the federal government. We're all in this together. We all want to improve public health. We all want to improve water and wastewater compliance, but we need to do it in an affordable manner that our citizens can afford. And we like to reestablish that working relationship where it's not adversarial as much as working together in order to move the ball forward. So I want to thank you very much for this opportunity to be here and give you a brief overview of the legislation. And I'm available, and actually there are actual lawyers in the room that actually helped write the bill. They probably can answer a little bit more detail than I can. But I do have copies of all those memos that EPA issued, and the law is easy enough to find. If you need anything, we are here to help. So I just want to thank you again for this opportunity, and thank very much Ohio EPA and Headquarters EPA for being here and engaging with you all. So thank you.